Here we have the Vector from Vector Synth. It's a 16-voice multi-timbral digital synth. It's currently monotimbral, but there are plans for a multi-timbral update soon. We interrupt this video to bring you this not very urgent news flash. The 16-voice polyphonic digital synth from Vector Synthesis, called the Vector, is to be given a multi-timbral update in early 2022. It is scheduled in. We are not given a clear date yet, but it will no longer be a monotimbral synth, so we will be able to play 2 sounds at a time. So if you're watching this in 2022, it may well already be multi-timbral. And I've been dying to get my hands on this for ages because it's just a cool and really unique looking little synth. And luckily for me, the manufacturers got in touch and asked me if I'd like to demo it. And of course, I absolutely jumped at the chance. And what makes it so unique is the fact that it's got all the sort of basic building blocks you'd normally get in a synth. You've got oscillators, you've got a mixer, you've got filters, you've got ADSR envelope, you've got a couple of LFOs, you've got effects, but everything is built in a slightly different way from a slightly different perspective, and that encourages you to really experiment. And they do call it on their website an experimental synth, I think, and I can understand why. So I thought with this, instead of just jumping into the oscillators and then the filters, I'd start off with showing exactly how it works and what makes it so unique. And the most obvious thing that jumps out at you with this is the orbiter. And we can see this little blue dot spinning around these shapes. These are Lisa juice shapes, I think that's how you pronounce it, of various complexity. And we can do all various strange things with them. And what that's effectively doing is mixing between each of the 4 corners. On each voice, we've got 2 oscillator pairs, 1 on each corner. Is corner 1, corner 2, corner 3, and corner 4. So all that's doing, it's spinning round and blending the mix between all those different voices. And you can hear that changing the tone. So the wider we have this, the greater the modulation. And what's really nice about this is that it adds really complex modulation. It's very basic, like I'm showing there from the default patch. You just blend in, almost like you've got 4 faders, and you just blend in between each of the voices by wiggling them up and down a bit. But we've also got much more complex things happening there with the filters, and we can also add these suborbiters. And now we've got modulation spinning around the modulation. So we can get all sorts of really complex, nice LFO style stuff, but it's not a simple LFO just modulating the filter, it's not a simple LFO just modulating the amplitude, it's actually modulating all sorts of things. And because it's within the confines of those 4 oscillator pairs, it never goes crazy sound and it all just works. And that can all be synced, so you get these really nice pumping effects or just these really nice gentle modulations. It's, you know, it's something that you can just play around with for hours and never get bored and constantly create really nice evolving tones. We can also have a standard ADSR as well. Just change that to the orbit. So we've got an ADSR for amplitude, as you'd expect, and then one for the orbit as well here. So you can really do some nice fine control. You can decide exactly what the start of the sound's going to sound like, move it to the center, and then somewhere else. I think 3 was very sort of dull, wasn't it? So we could start with one tone. And move from another to another. Let's change the speed of that orbit. So if you do want really fine control over things, you can have it. You can manipulate the sound however you like over that ADSR curve. We've even got 3 LFOs in here as well. We've got 1 for each of these lines. So if we go to the AD segment, you can add some wobble. Let's just slow that down. Turn it to a linear curve. On exponential, it speeds up and slows down, which is really nice actually. Really difficult to do on a standard synth. Let's put some modulation on the release. And then we can add those little suborbiters as well. So instantly it takes you to places you can't do on general synths. And it's just really fun to play with. If we go into the effects page, we can see we've got monophonic, polyphonic, and dual. In monophonic, we've got up to 16 voices from the one voice. So if we go back into the orbiter page, we can see all of those 16 voices having a little suborbit. And in dual mode, we've got effectively 2 voices per voice, which drops it down as opposed to 8 voice polyphonic. 2 voices playing there. Put it back to a standard curve. And at the minute, everything's following that little blue dot, but we can start each of them from the center, so each of the voices starts in the central point. And I'll just stress again, this is the default patch, and all I've done is put a few suborbiters on and messed around with the warp. Let's do something slightly different with it, shall we? Just to see. spin it round, warp it a bit. So just really gentle but interesting modulation. And to bring that back to the standard curves, just press this reset button here. Hopefully now, if you've ever seen any demos of this, you understand what all those little green lights are doing. And just carrying on with the interface, maybe let's add an arpeggiator or a sequence. Turn the arpeggiator on. Maybe let's turn that into a sequence. Let's go into here and let's record a sequence. I think we go up to 64 steps, but we'll just put 32 on in for now. So as a live performance tool, this is brilliant. You can just have a beat running and then that playing along with it and tweak it to your heart's content. It's absolutely fabulous and you don't get mental things that you're not expecting. It's really, really clever interface actually. What else should we look at on here? We've also got control of all the filters at the same time. We can see these two slightly different coloured lines on the filters and they're controlling all of them. So let's put that sequence back on. And you'll notice that the filter cutoff and the resonance were modulating there, and that's because they're controlled by what's happening in each of the four corners. So as your little blue dot spins around the screen or moves around the screen, the filter cutoff and the filter resonance changes according to what's being set in each of those corners, if they're set in that mode, and I'll discuss that more when I come to the filter section. But again, it just means that everything is sort of interacting with each other in a really, really nice way. So I think that brings me to the end of the overall interface maybe. Should we just take a look at what we've got on the front panel? On the top left, we've got our ADSR controls. We've got control of ADSR for the amplitude for everything, but when we're in these Lissajous, I hope I'm saying that right and not making a fool of myself, these Lissajous curves, so when we're in the curves, let's just leave it at that, shall we? We don't have ADSR control of the modulation there because obviously this little blue blob's doing it. But when we go into the ADSR mode, as I showed earlier, we've got control of ADSR over the orbit speed. This button here takes us into the corner matrix mode. We can see the generator matrix here, that's for the oscillators, and then the filters, and I'll look at both of those separately when I look in a little bit more detail at the oscillators and the filters. Then we've got this switch here that just basically switches what the dual function knobs are doing. We've seen these two knobs here, changing the suborbit size and the speed. But But these also have, well, I say dual functions, they've got multi-functions. It depends on what mode you're in. If we go into the effects page, we've got mono mode, poly mode, and dual mode, and we can see these parameters are changing from detune of the stack to detune drift to the detune follower. So that's basically the oscillator to detune. This is like analog drift, and in mono mode, it's detune of the stack. So it gets very detuney, and on dual mode, I showed this earlier. Down here, we've got two dedicated LFOs, one for the pitch and one for the amplitude. Let's go back to the main page. So not super fast by any stretch of the imagination, but if you want FM tones, we've got hundreds of ways of making cool FM tones in this, and I'll get to that when I do the oscillators. We've also got the tremolo here. Take the vibrato off. And as this can all be really simply synced using these switches over here, it gets some really nice throbbing sounds if you want. Down here, we've got 5 dedicated knobs for delay time, feedback, chorus speed, chorus depth, and chorus color. And these knobs here have dual functions depending on what page you're on. If you're in the effects page, for example, they are now changing these 5 top effects parameters. And if you're on the orbit page, they're changing the sound parameters of the overtone generators, the overtone blend, and the filter cutoff and resonance. And you'll notice there that all 4 of these along the bottom are changing at the same time, and that's because we're not in focus mode. If we go into the focus mode, push this button, this takes us to modulating or controlling each of the individual corners. So if I go to corner 1, when I tweak these knobs, I'm now just changing the overtone generators for 1, and the filter just for 1 as well. And once you start playing with this, it all just becomes second nature really quickly. On the top right, we've got the levels for the reverb, the chorus, the delay, and the overall level. Then we've got this cool little section here on the center on the right. I really like this. It's just a sort of unique way of setting it up. I'm sure you can do all this on other synths, maybe, but it's just not so obvious. It's a great little performance feature. So turning the arpeggiator on, that's pretty obvious. We've got a dedicated knob for note length. And I really like the fact the arpeggiator's got its own sort of big knob. Pretty cool. Then this is really interesting. We've got this feed direction switch, and this feeds the signals into the ARP or to the delay. So if we've got the delay feed on, turn the delay up, we can turn that feed off, and that means we can use the delay as a looper if the delay is not being fed. Now feed it, increase the feedback, take the feedback off, or the delay feed. Off again. So a really cool performance tool. So there we've got the delay looping continuously and then playing over the top while you're still hearing the delay. Really quite cool, and you can do the same with the arpeggiator as well. Arpeggiator is not active. Turn it on. Bring the feed out. very cool. So there, again, I'm playing along with the ARP without affecting the ARP. And in the bottom right here, these switches are for sync. I've mentioned that before. Let's just sync everything up, shall we? Let's play an ARP. Again, that's all really easy to set up, and you're getting really complex modulation really simply. I think it's really good just for messing around and playing, and also just sort of getting hypnotized by those little balls as they whiz around. Really good fun. Okay then, I think that gives me a good overall view of what it is. Should we dig in now to a bit more sound design and exactly how these oscillators work? Okay then, I'm back on the default patch. Let's go into focus mode. Press it twice and we're focusing on 1. This is, they call it generator 1, and this has got 2 overtone generators, and an overtone generator we can effectively think of as an oscillator. We've got 7 different wave shapes for overtone generator 1 and overtone generator 2. So as I say, that's basically having 7 different oscillator wave shapes. The first 3 are mainly even, the second 3 are mainly odd, and the final one, the 7th one, is noise, but it's got a fundamental frequency in there. It's like pink noise over a sine wave almost. Have a look. So that's oscillator 1 or overtone generator 1. And the reason why they talk about overtone generators and not oscillators is because there's a lot of FM goes on here. So it's those overtones and those harmonics that are really important when you start blending things in AM or phase modulation and stuff like that, which again, I'll show in just a second. But if we look at generator 2, we've got the same waves, but we blend them either by adding them or by multiplying them in FM. So let's add them together for now, and let's put generator 2 on D. So that's all the odd and all the even, which gives us a sawtooth. So there you go, that's a really standard, simple, obvious synth tone. So we can get standard sounds out of this, but that's why it's worth digging into a little bit and finding out exactly how it all works. So that's the 2 of them added together. We can also multiply them. So this slider here in the center, we're just getting overtone generator 1. But if we add them together, and now we can multiply them, which is FM. And that's how you can use this machine to get some really gnarly, nasty, dirty, lovely basses. And obviously with all the weird and wonderful ways you can modulate things, you can get all sorts of crazy stuff out of this. So let's take a look at the FM a bit more then. We go into the corner matrix, go to the generators, and we can see we've got the 4 separate corners here. So 1, we've just been playing with. Here's 2, 3, and 4. We've got phase modulation, amplitude modulation, phase modulation and amplitude modulation, phase distortion and amplitude modulation, and reversed phase distortion and amplitude modulation. And I think that's just as one before the other. So put the arpeggiator on. So they all give quite distinct tones. So tons of those really nice glassy digital sounds in there. I've not filtered it out yet, so you're getting all the harmonics, and it sounds really nice and bright and shiny, doesn't it? Got a really distinct tone, this. We've got a couple of other tabs up here. We've got generator 1 and generator 2 tuning tabs, and we don't tune these in semitones or in cents like we would with the standard synth. Because we're playing around with FM here, we're looking at intervals and harmonic intervals. So if we put one on a half, third, a quarter, or a fifth. So let's just listen to oscillator 1 on its own, or overtone generator 1 on its own. Blend that with generator 2. Let's change 2. So when we're using the phase modulation or the amplitude modulation, I was going to say you always get musical results, but I didn't that time, did I? On phase modulation, it's working a lot nicer. So you can hear there, except for the amplitude modulation, that sounds quite musical. And this prime slot tab is a bit weird. It determines where the fundamental frequency is placed in the signal chain if it's with generator 1, generator 2. So you can hear it's disappeared because we're only listening to generator 1. It's blended, back again, or it's in the mix, back again. So if we put the fundamental in generator 2 and we're not listening to generator 2, you don't hear it. So if we detune generator 1, we're not hearing the fundamental until we put the fundamental in generator 1. So you might not be listening to the fundamental at all. You could just turn it off. Bring it back in again. So it really feels like it's been set up to do nice things with the harmonics and be overtly digital in some ways, but without being a DX7, without getting confused over all the different algorithms. So starting with a simple sawtooth, you can get into complex things straight away. Really, really nice. So you can see why they describe this as experimental, with all those different sort of FM tones, the phase modulation, the phase distortion, the AM, the different generators, placing the harmonics in different places on different tones, or the fundamental in different places on different corners, and then modulating between them. How you can get really super complex really easily, but really quickly, and I'm not sure anyone will be able to predict what's going to come out once you start modulating things, especially when you put the suborbiters on. So just really nice. It does, every time you do something, it doesn't sound bad, it just sounds different, and you find yourself liking an awful lot of stuff and saving the same patch about 10 times in different ways. So I think that brings me to the end of the oscillators. I can't think if there's anything else to show you there. Should we move over to the filters then? And the filters on this actually took me a little while to get my head around, not because the filters themselves are very complex. If we look here, we've just got high pass, band pass and low pass at 12 dB, plus a low pass at 24 dB. But it's the interaction between the corner settings and the filters themselves that I had to wrap my head around. And that's because on the default patch, you can see here, filter 1, 2, 3 and 4 are all set in the signal path to act after the blend of generator 1 and generator 2 on each of them. But we can actually place the filters wherever we like. So we'd actually put filter 3 after overtone generator 1 in corner 1. So it doesn't do anything to the sound that's coming from corner 3, although it sort of does, and that's why it gets a little bit complicated. So if I play corner 3 now, and I adjust the filter 3, it's not doing anything because it doesn't do anything on corner 3. If I play corner 1 now and modulate or play with filter 3, so filter 3 here is acting on generator 1, but it still affects all the others that are in orbit mode. So the filters, we can have them set as static or in orbit mode. When they're in orbit mode, they change the cutoff and the resonance depending on where they are on the screen. So if we come back into the orbit page, you can see these two lines here are moving, and they're the filter settings for any of the filters that are following the orbit. Go back into the filter page, we can see here we can have them as static or orbiter. So if they're in static mode, they just use the settings that we've got on these final 4 lines down here. But if they're in orbiter mode, they use the settings that are shown modulating there. And those filters are modulating depending on where you are on the touchpad, or where you are on the screen, or the XY plane, or whatever you want to call it. If I just move the orbit around, you can see it's changing. So if I move it towards corner 3, they're set up almost the same as corner 3. If I move them to corner 4, it's set up the same as corner 4. You can see these line up with corner 4. If I go to corner 1, they're the same as corner 1. I think I'm making this sound more complicated than it is, but I'd really tried to rack my head around it. You've got the corner settings, which are the filter settings, and they're the filter settings for that filter, but that filter doesn't have to be in that corner. It can be anywhere, but those settings may affect the tone overall for anything else that's whizzing around and doing the orbiter. But it doesn't affect it in such a great way, because once you're in that corner, so once I'm in corner 1, the effect of corner 3 is minimal. In the end, it's just 4 filters that can be placed anywhere you like in that whole matrix. So let's just have a listen to them now I've sort of tried to get my head straight about them. So starting off with the low pass filter in 24 dB mode, just a sawtooth. Increasing the resonance, drops the volume a little bit, but not as much as it does on something like a Moog. And we're getting our maximum peak there at about 17,000 Hertz. And what you notice here is you get loads of control over this, no stepping what. We're not going into self-oscillation, it can't play on its own, but we can track it. Turn the tracking off. And the maximum resonance is actually dependent on this global resonance here. If I turn that down, I'm effectively setting the maximum global resonance. Again, this is something that's quite useful to stop it going sort of bizarrely mental when you go from corner to corner. Turn it back up again. And that's as low as we're going to go. Because we're not getting the self-oscillation, we can't play it like you can something like a Moog, I suppose. Take tracking off. Let's bring it up. So that lowest note depends on what I'm playing on the keyboard, but if we go down an octave, bring the tracking back in, and down another octave, and another. Just careful of those volumes there, see that going into the red? So we can play it. Let's try it in low pass 12 dB. So it's nice and gentle, it's got a bit of an Oberheim feel to it. Bandpass. But you can hear there we're getting some really nice raw tones. So it's got a really nice overall tone. And the high pass. Again, really nice sounding. Let's just place it after generator 2 rather than in the blend. It's doing exactly what you'd expect. Overtone generator 1 is coming through untouched. Let's turn that to a high pass. Let's put filter 2 in there, shall we? So we go to filter 2, let's put filter 2 on generator 1. Now we're on the filter 2 tab, we're modulating or we're controlling filter 2. So just so much potential for sound design. If you took the whole thing and you just left it in one corner, there's days and days and hours worth of fun just playing around with the actual tone. Never mind all the orbiter and the modulation. We can only ever have 4 of the boxes because the filters can only ever act on one block of the synth engine. So it's actually quite simple, but you can have them all on the same block. Let's put them all on one. So filter 4 on one, filter 3 on one, filter 2 on one, and we can see they're all on filter 1, and then we change the type of all the filters. And we can see we've got 4 different little icons. So as I say, there's tons of stuff in there. You can spend hours and hours just playing around with this. It's great fun. Other things you can do, you can track the keyboard or not track it. You can't adjust the amount of tracking. You can bypass the filter altogether. You can bypass them all. And we can see there, they're all bypassed. So the way the screen's set up is absolutely fabulous, I think. It's really easy to see what's going on with all the sounds, really quite simply. Okay, I think that brings me to the end of the filters. I know I've not played the filters too much, but I wanted to show and demonstrate exactly how it's set up because I've seen a few other videos on this and really nice videos, but I couldn't quite understand how it all works, and I'm not sure if you've watched this you'll still understand it either, but maybe it'll add a little bit of extra information you haven't already got. So let's move over then now to this effects page, and should we take a look at the Arp and the sequencer? I know I touched on this earlier, but let's just dig in a little bit more to it, shall we? We've got an arpeggiator. Let's just delete all that. So as a play, so that's it in its most basic form, and as I showed earlier, we can have it so we feed that or we don't feed it. In other words, we can play over the top. We can record up to 64 steps, but let's make a shorter one. We've got to make sure the feed's on here so that we're feeding the MIDI notes. Press record. There you go, 16. We've got up, down, and random. So up. We don't have octave ranges here, so it's quite simple. But let's humanize it. It's changing the length of the notes and things, isn't it? It's quite nice, that. And then we've got these bars and these chains. I think we understand or know what the chains are going to do, don't we? And then these bars here, these change the octaves. So. And we can also turn steps off. Just click them off, really simple. And we can randomize those bars and those chains so they change with every cycle. That's a really well thought out, nice way of randomizing things without changing notes, just changing the octaves or changing which of the notes are actually chained together. So you're getting different glides on different passes. Really, really clever. Just well thought through, and I think it shows that there's a lot of passion in this and a lot of thought gone into it. What else have we got? Should we take a quick look at the effects? So here's the raw sound. Add some reverb. Oh, nice bit of modulation at the end there, isn't there? Yeah, you can hear that sort of pitch bending. Let's change the size. So these knobs now are affecting those 5 parameters. That's effectively a freeze, isn't it? So I don't think it's the smoothest reverb I've ever heard. It sounds a bit granular, but maybe that's the tone as well that I'm putting through it. So just reverb size, reverb colour and the amount of reverb, but actually you get loads of different things from it and you find yourself reaching for it quite a lot because it just sounds nice. We've got drive and drive colour. Let's turn the reverb down for now. So it does nasty as well. And the delay, again the delay is quite simple but effective. We saw it earlier in looping mode. Let's just take the sync off. Add a bit of delay. And we've brought in a bandpass filter there. And we've got mono or stereo mode. And next to that actually you can see ARP, both or delay. And that shows what signals are being fed through this feed direction button. So if the ARP's on and the delay isn't, we're not feeding into the delay. So sometimes you start playing with it, you think you put the delay on, and where's it gone? Well, actually, you've not fed it. If we whack that feedback up, just clear the buffer instantly if things are going a little bit mental in a gig. Nice little touch there. So loads of stuff there for playing live, and handy again if you look at this ARP, both and delay indicator down there. If your feed button is on or off, you've got the flashing light to show that you're feeding, and when you're not feeding anything, it turns static. So white, off, static, off, flash in, on, green. Just some of the little things that puzzled me when I was playing with it at first. Why is it green sometimes and why is it white other times? And now I know, and hopefully so do you. Anyway, should we take a look at the chorus? Mono or stereo. And we can adjust the cutoff on a bandpass on it as well. And we can speed it up. So although each of these effects are quite basic, they all sound nice and they're really, really useful. I mean, let's just put the reverb. Oh, I've still got something going through the delay. Good job, we've got that button there. Let's turn the delay feedback down. Well, that was a useful sound for showing what the effects were doing, but not necessarily the best to show them how nice they can be. Let's find another one. What else haven't we looked at? We've got these dice here and we can sort of randomize patch generation. If you don't like it, undo it. Let's try another. So if I've left you completely confused, you can just press the random button. This global slowdown just makes things go really slowly, so your arpeggiator is going 1/16 of the speed, and so is the orbiter, so you can just go those lovely little things where it just pings every now and then, the modulation just changes slightly. Should we try something like that? can tell you now, I've just been doing that for about half an hour, just getting completely absorbed in it. It's so much fun. And that brings me to the end, really. So what are my final thoughts? Regular viewers of this channel, you know I've got a fair collection of synths, and you know them inside out, and you sort of know what's going to happen and you can predict what you're going to do. With this, it is much more experimental, for me at least at the minute, because although you can go in and you can really dig down deep into the sound design sort of building blocks, the basic building blocks with the oscillators and the filters and the like, you're never quite sure what's going to happen when you start modulating it, and it just comes up with all these lovely things. And I say it comes up with these lovely things, some of them are really dirty and nasty, but in a good way, but it just sucks you in, and I'm really impressed by it. I think it's a really complex synth that's really easy to control. You don't need to know any of the stuff I've just been talking about. You can just come along, stick in an arpeggiator and just start tweaking and pressing the randomize button and playing with things. And I'm telling you now, within a couple of minutes, you'll be mesmerized and you'll have already come up with something that's really nice. So from an inspirational perspective, it's absolutely fantastic. For all those sort of lovely glassy pads and just evolving tones, spectacular. For your bass sounds, yeah, you can really dig in and get some really nasty, gnarly sounding basses with all that FM in there. So highly recommended. Definitely give it a go. If you're looking for a digital synth that's got something else to it, it's not a standard wavetable synth. It really does come to things from a different angle. If you've used something like Animoog by Moog, you'll have an idea of what this does. So Animoog has the sort of orbiter and that sort of thing, but it starts off from samples. So with this, it's almost like you've got the Animoog interface, but you can actually dig down and create those tones from scratch yourself. And when they bring a multi-timbral version of it, it will be absolutely spot on. The only negatives I've ever heard about it is that it's not multi-timbral, so that should be sorted out pretty soon as well. Well, I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere, and if it was, please think about subscribing, ring the bell, and maybe share, and also potentially join me on my Patreon page, where I've got hours and hours worth of tutorials helping you to get the most out of your synths and helping you to be able to pick up any synth and play it and program it. Any synth, I say except for this, it's all the same basic principles as you get on any subtractive synth, but they're just set up in a different way. So yeah, I really like it. Well, I hope that was of use, and I will see you next time.